Hi there, I'm Trevor Coote, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. Our guest on this episode is Robert Mittelman, currently acting dean of the Faculty of Management at Royal Roads University. Robert shares his stories of small business ownership and social entrepreneurship, starting a tourism industry-focused candy distribution company in Ontario, Canada, that navigated border closing disruptions like 9/11 and the SARS pandemic before securing the rights for Marvel character-branded product. Marvel wasn't the superhero in this story, which makes for an unexpected outcome. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, welcome back to Business is Fucking Hard. Our guest today is Robert Mittelman. Robert, I'm excited to dive into your story. It's a little bit different than what we're going to hear from a lot of folks because you're right now in a little bit different role. You're acting dean at the university, Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia. But you've had a really cool background in entrepreneurship and business ownership. And the first time that you and I chatted kind of off to the side at a conference, I knew right away that if I launched this podcast, I wanted you to share those stories. So I'm really excited about hearing what stories you have to share with everyone. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Always happy to share the stories. It's been a long and winding journey that it didn't start off in entrepreneurship, didn't start off running a business. Now I'm running a business school, and I've still got decades ahead of me. So who knows where I'll end up and what I'll be doing.
Okay, so we'll get into the if you still have an appetite for it question down the road, because I think that's a really cool one to kind of venture after we hear the experiences that you've had. So what was that introduction into business? What was it that kind of kicked it off for you, and at what point in your life?
Well, when I think about business, for me, I really am thinking about business ownership and like entrepreneurship, running my own business. When I graduated from university, I went off and got a job, and I thought it was everything I was looking for. I graduated with a degree in international business, and I learned a few languages, and I got a job. I moved to Mexico City. I got a job for a Swiss company in biotech, and I was speaking French with head office in Geneva. I was speaking Spanish with my colleagues and my coworkers. I was speaking English with the Americans we liaised with. And I thought it was going to be everything I was looking for. And working for a large multinational, where I was working on one small part of a small project that had to go through like all of these levels, I felt like I was having no impact. I was a tiny little cog in a giant wheel. And I thought, there has to be something more to this. Like I wanted more. I wanted to have more impact. I wanted to have more control. And that's when I made the decision to move back to Canada and start up in the end, a couple businesses where I knew I could be so much more involved in every aspect of the business.
So how long was that transition? How long was that for that realization that, the amount of experience that you're getting from that, it just wasn't the fulfilling experience you thought it would be? How long did that take?
I mean, honestly, I think I realized pretty quickly that the career wasn't what I thought it would be. But I was living in Mexico. And so when I was done kind of traveling around on my weekends, exploring, then I made the decision to come home.
And then what did that transition look like? Like what was,
I mean, that transition, I went from working for $1 billion corporation to a home-based business with a makeshift office in the basement. It's just like night and day. But at the same time, when we started it was my uncle and I, and there's like a whole bunch of family dynamics to talk about, and like in like running a business with family members. But I was everywhere from the janitor to the CEO in the same day, oftentimes filling multiple roles. This is really micro entrepreneurship. This is just two of us, at the ground trying to get something going. And what I loved about it is that I'll say it really was we. Maybe I should speak in the we, but like every success was due to the two of us, and every failure was also due to the two of us. And
Right.
I really appreciated. I like that. It drove me.
I absolutely love that, and I can totally relate. I would suspect that anybody who is in a small business where those decisions, I've written about decision making in the past, and I mean it is that element of control. It's that element of, like you said, whether it's going well or it's going poorly, this is mine to own, and that's a big driver for people's motivations, for sure.
So I went from working in biotech, trying to introduce a new drug into the Mexican healthcare system, a drug for AIDS patients that prevented wasting. And I moved back to Canada and I started a candy business. And I was selling lollipops and rock candy and candy sticks, but it was all mine. And so I knew that in my other career, I was going to have an impact, or at least the business would, and that was important. But at the time when I moved back and started that first business, that candy business, that was all about the impact that I could have on the business and see how I could make it grow.
That is a lot to try to comprehend, isn't it? That
It
impact,
is, yes.
that impact for a greater good versus that impact of self-fulfillment.
I think in the end, we'll get to it later on when I discover social entrepreneurship. When I discover how I can blend the two. At the time, at the beginning, I was focused on entrepreneurship, running a business, sales, growing, innovation, my ideas, what I could put out there in the world. And it was thrilling at the beginning anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And we will unpack. I love the social entrepreneurship conversation. We will get there. So we're in Ontario selling candy.
We are.
What were the tell me the initial challenges, like obviously the basement being one, family dynamics, sure, like you said, but just trying to figure out business in and of itself, small business in and of itself. What were the biggest challenges?
I think for us, we were selling candy and confectionery into the tourism industry. Like we were focused on theme parks, zoos, museums. Like we were strictly in tourism. That's where, the kids are and their parents are buying their kids these candies as they go around, like the big swirly lollipops with a picture of like Fred Flintstone on it or something like that. That was me. At the theme park trying to get in. The challenges were that we were up against some rather large competitors. And some of our customers knew that it was just two of us. Others didn't. And so at the time, we felt like we needed to portray ourselves as a much larger, much more well-established business. And so we did a variety of interesting things at the time. This was some time ago, so you'll have to, a little bit of time travel here. We had a phone system installed in the house where every room in the house was a different extension. And so if you wanted to call accounts payable, the kitchen phone would ring because that was extension, 134. The spare bedroom
so good
was a different extension. That was like, maybe it was accounts receivable or wherever it was. And we had different people record Like no one ever picked up the phone. Like you always had to leave a message, and we'd have different people leave a voicemail. Like, thank you for calling accounts payable at Gatlinburg Distributors. We're not available to take your call, and we'd have a different voice, and so you could hear phones ringing in different parts of the house because when you called into the phone system, it would direct your call to the right place. Okay, make it seem like we're a bigger operation than we were. It was just the two of us, and so we're selling a lot of candy, like by the truckload. And so eventually, after we moved not quite out of the basement, but we needed a warehouse space. But we didn't have the funds or the volume to hire staff. So we would run our own warehouse. So there are times where I'm driving the forklift and on the phone with a customer.
Right.
And they're like,
Right.
What's that echo or what's that noise? And I'm like, oh, I'm just in the warehouse checking on your order. Meanwhile, I'm the one driving, like backing up the truck, backing up the forklift and putting it on the wall before having to pack the order myself. And, it was just, maybe it was my age. Maybe it was the industry we were in, but we just didn't want people to know that it was really just the two of us scraping stuff together.
And I think that's something that I've wanted to use this podcast and other conversations that I've had and some of the writing to unpack, because I think that's one of the things, this lack of vulnerability or opportunity for vulnerability from business owners, because they feel like they need to put on a front. It feels like you need to portray something that isn't necessarily there. And you took that to the extreme.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we did. Our clients needed the assurance, the reliability that there was that their supply was going to arrive every time they ordered, that nothing was going to be back ordered, because the tourist season is relatively short where we were in Canada. And so you have to take advantage of those 4 or 5 months, and it has to be, there's no vacation. It's 7 days a week. If I want to take time off November, December, January, February, no problem. I could probably take off 3 months in a row.
Right.
It's not going to do anything. But during that season, the clients needed to know that you were available, that you could deliver, because they would see millions of people through their doors, and you needed to be able to provide the supplies that they needed.
Was there an evolution in the company at that point? Like, it's the two of you doing all of the jobs. Was there a point where you got to more staff?
Sure. Seasonally, we were able to, bring in people to help pack and produce the orders. In the end, there were a whole bunch of things that happened, which we should probably get into at some point, that for every 2 steps forward, for every little bit of growth, there was a big step back. And it just, year after year, season after season, things would be going well. And so we're going back a little more than 20 years here. So you'll have to forgive me here. But so tourist industry in Canada, typically right along the border with the U.S., summer of 2000, summer of 2001, everything is great. 9/11 happens, the towers come down, and the borders close. For all the terrible that happened as a result of those incidents, so cross-border traffic stopped. Niagara Falls, which was like one of our biggest customers, was a ghost town overnight. And so the tourist season dries up. And so there's no more tourists. People aren't coming into Canada. So huge hit, especially for a 2-person business. The next summer, things are a little bit better, but both Canada and the U.S. are at war in Afghanistan, and we're still not seeing tourism bounce back the way it was pre-9/11. Move ahead one more summer, things are starting to look a little bit better. And then before we knew about COVID, we had SARS. So I don't know if you remember the SARS epidemic.
Right.
So another pandemic hitting Canada, and it was like, Toronto and southwestern Ontario became like, the epicenter of all of that. And then again, tourists stopped coming. And for every little initiative that we could put forward, there were all these little big things out of our control, these geopolitical changes that kept setting us back. And as a small two-person business, we had to be resilient in a way, and not even to mention people start thinking about being healthier. And here I am selling candy and sugar.
Yeah.
So we need to
Yeah.
start pivoting. We need to start thinking about maybe moving away from tourism, moving away from just straight confectionery. And those are some big financial risks. Some things worked, some things didn't. Uh, but it was just as a small business that was hit after hit after hit, and we make it through, most of the summer, but then something happens that just knocks us right back.
And so that was kind of a 4-year span that you just described. How long
Yeah.
did you have that the candy business altogether?
So only about another year or so past this,
Okay.
past where I just ended off
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah.
In the end, I thought that running my own very small micro business wasn't going to be what I wanted. And so eventually I made the decision to move on and pursue other things.
And was your uncle on board with that decision? Was it a mutual decision between the two of you, or?
So yes, in the end, we're family and we want what's best for each other. There was definitely some tension there. It was always a positive working relationship. But as family, I don't know if it's easier or harder to disagree. Depends on your personal family dynamic. So there were a lot of things, a lot of discussions that did not happen. I think because we were family, had we been business partners while we were, had we been just business partners, we would have had different discussions.
Right.
I think we would have made different choices. I mean, that in the end, yes, I went back to school because, I mean, it was hard for me to think about going to get a job because I hadn't really had a boss, and my own company on a resume with my uncle as my only reference probably wasn't going to open the doors that I needed. So I went off to get a really fancy MBA, and my hope was that I could take this like world class fancy MBA, get a job at Nestle, sell Skittles, and be like Willy Wonka. That was like, I was going to take my candy experience, combine it with a fancy degree, and then move on and sell, just be selling Pop-Tarts or something. But it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
So do you and your uncle still talk at family picnics?
Yeah, I just saw him last month. Everything is fine. He's held on to one line of that business he still sticks with. I'd say 90% of it dissolved over the years. My uncle is someone, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, he loves to start businesses. He hates running them. And so
Right.
I think after I left some of the existing lines, he just wasn't into the running the day-to-day of what he needed to do. So eventually it changed focus. He held on to the business.
So you've exited, you go get your MBA, you're thinking you're going to be part of an international conglomerate that's spreading happiness and joy around the globe with sweet treats. What actually happened?
Well, it was during my MBA where I learned all about social enterprise. It's where I learned about social entrepreneurship, and I learned how I could combine my business experience and my degree to make the world a better place. And after that, my mind was blown. There was no way I could go back to selling sugar. I mean, let alone talking about obesity and all the harms. I just wasn't actually doing good, let alone doing harm. And, the end of the program was a consulting project. You go work for a company for a few months, and Nestle sponsored a project at the school. I would have moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and worked on a marketing project for a frozen breakfast treat. Think like a new kind of Pop-Tart kind of thing. Before, that was exactly what I was looking for. That was my Wonka golden ticket, the in that I needed. But after learning about social entrepreneurship and making a difference, I ended up taking a consulting job with a small nonprofit in the mountains of Peru with intermittent electricity, helping them with strategic planning, cash flow statements, budgeting, fundraising, all the things that they didn't want to do, but that were essential for them to keep doing the good work that they were doing in their community. And I didn't need to be out in community installing cook stoves. My biggest impact was working in their office and helping them run a business. And that was just like so much more fulfilling than anything else. And I took that experience, and when it was over, when I graduated, I came back to Canada to launch a social enterprise.
So when you land in Peru, well, I mean, obviously a whole different environment geographically,
Sure.
people wise, the business, social enterprise versus for profit, all of that kind of stuff. But what did you find was the biggest value add in you being able to hit the ground running? Was it your experience in Mexico with like this multinational? Sure. Was it the MBA, or was it the experience of being able to drive a forklift and talk a guy into a new sale at the same time?
So I'll choose a little bit of all of it. I think as the entrepreneur, and then through the MBA with a little bit more theory behind it, you're able to connect every piece of the business because you wear every department's hat. You understand the impact that a decision in HR will have on sales, a decision on sales that'll impact distribution. You understand the system. You don't work for just one area. And so combined my business experience there with some of the stuff that you learn in the MBA, the theory and like the practice and those real best practices. Because I was just making it up as I go beforehand, before I went to school. Along with the knowledge of the culture and the language that I brought to Peru. I mean, I don't know if I would have chosen just any project. I felt comfortable moving to South America. And so to bring all that together, to work with the NGO, and to put, I mean, you get a lot of joy, in doing that work in community. But I put some of that aside to say the way that I can help this organization best is maybe by developing a spreadsheet, by working on their cash flow. It's not being out in community, getting my hands dirty, working with the people in the village. That is a very rewarding experience. But the way I could contribute the most was in the office. And so that's where I got to use my business expertise and my experience to help make the difference.
And that takes a lot of self-awareness, but self-discipline as well, to recognize that, the fulfillment that you might get with being out in the community, you might not get with building the Excel spreadsheet, but that the value that adds to the organization could be just as much, right?
Yeah, it's you're a part of a team. And not everyone, everyone has a role to play. And it's just understanding where you fit.
And that, I think, is the crux of being in business, is that awareness of what your contribution is, being part of a bigger whole. I want to go back for a second because you did identify that your uncle is still operating some
Sure.
iteration of the original company. When you exited, obviously it wasn't the company didn't dissolve at that point. Was it still was it viable at that point? Like, obviously it's sustained for this much longer, but was the financial pressure one of the motivations for you to get out?
Yeah, I think so. We really wanted different things in terms of the risks we were willing to take to make the company grow. He was very comfortable, I think, where things were at. You know, he had a family and kids to take care of, and I was younger and I was willing to take those chances. I needed the business to grow like hockey stick. Like, I needed to see that. And he was like, I just want to keep things where they are. You know, he had the mortgage. I didn't. I wanted things to boom, and he just wanted things to, he didn't want to risk. He didn't want to lose what we had, and I wanted to gain what we didn't have. And there was a tension there that I don't think we could easily resolve. So, for example, we're seeing all these stumbling blocks in tourism in particular. I said, okay, we need to diversify. We need to start doing other things. Either if we stayed in tourism beyond candy, we need to bring other value to our customers, or we need to start selling candy outside of tourism. And the lollipops that we were selling, for instance, sell for $6 or $7. These aren't things you get at the 7-Eleven or at the corner store, right? So we have to look into new products to go into new markets that were very different. I don't think we understood how different they were from the types of businesses that we were dealing with. And so in one instance, we're able to secure a new product line. We got into cotton candy, bagged, like pre-made cotton candy. And we secured the rights for cotton candy that was branded with one of the characters from a Marvel movie. And we're like, okay, so now in 2024, if I can say what year we're in right now, Marvel movies are booming. At the time, they were still a little hit and miss. But we secured the rights to distribute branded cotton candy for a Marvel movie. And all of a sudden, we're trying to pitch the movie theater chains. No idea how that works. Gas stations, drugstores, places like Walmart. And we're a two-person business where, with a tiny little warehouse. And we managed to get our product into Shoppers Drug Mart. Okay, this was I thought this was going to be a huge deal. This is the first step to changing the business, the direction we're going to go. And so we get our first order, we send it off, and all of these fees that we weren't ready for, all of these penalties for how we shipped, wrapped, labeled the pallets of cotton candy that went out. For us, never having done it before, it was something that I thought was going to grow the business. We'd make a lot of money. We land a giant national account on the Marvel movie bombed, which is one of the, like a superhero movie. It's like one of the worst selling ranked, movies. That was just bad luck, I think, on our part. But, our experience with Shoppers was like, it cost us money. Like, you don't make that much when you sell things for pennies. There's not that much margin. You need to sell a high volume. But you start to get hit with some of these penalties because we just weren't ready. A two-person business where I used to make deliveries with my own personal car, All of a sudden we were playing in a league that we weren't ready for. And that was a risk I was willing to take. I was willing to learn from and move forward. And I think on the family dynamic side, it wasn't a risk he was willing to take. There were only so many of those hits that he could take before, we start talking about the impact on my little cousins and his kids and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I love the name of your podcast because yes, it was fucking hard to figure it out. And at the time, we're kind of like, I'm willing to take chances. I want to move forward with things. And in the end, it just wasn't right. So he held on to the fudge line of our business. And it's still going strong today. With the pre-made fudge mix and all that stuff, which is great. But yeah, some of the other things just didn't work out. And if I don't ever watch another Incredible Hulk movie, I'll be very happy.
This was the story when you told me this story, that was the one that I'm like, okay, that just kind of encapsulates everything about business, right? Is this, you score the word marvel, the word rights to marvel anything should have people just going like, okay, we've made it. And then you score the retailing opportunity, and that should be just a natural slam dunk. I still look at product on shelves. I don't care where it is. I look at it and go, how did they get that there for anything less than $25? Even if it's like a $2 item. It just blows my mind. And then the other piece about that story is the learning on the fly. The fact that so much of business, like you can get an MBA. You can go and get an MBA and you still don't fundamentally know all the penalties and the shipping requirements and how to deliver product out of the back of your car to a Shoppers Drug Mart after securing a contract, right? I love that story.
Business, part science, part art. In the end, when it's people, right? It's not chemistry. You can't be assured how things are going to go. I mean, if we look further back into some of the stories that I told, there's no way we could have predicted some of those geopolitical shifts and changes and those challenges. So you have to be ready for that. I don't think there's any business plan or canvas that I could have had that would have said, okay, so what if all of a sudden within 24 hours there are no more tourists? I'm like, then just pack up and go. And so the fact that we made it through all of those challenges every year, and we saw a number of our friends and fellow suppliers who had small businesses of their own not succeed. We were able to pivot and innovate and be resilient to come up with new things, to take some chances. But in the end, it just wasn't enough.
And I mean, the biggest thing that we saw recently is COVID, and that impact was felt by every business owner, which is kind of the opportunity that we have to demonstrate that vulnerability, and the consumer can kind of finally see behind the curtain and say, okay, this isn't easy. Like these things nobody can predict, right? Okay, so I feel like I'm all over the place with your timeline here, but if we make eye contact with the camera on a podcast, we're going to break the fourth wall. But let's go back to, how long were you in Peru?
Oh, just for a summer. That experience was a part of my, that was a part of my MBA. That was, it was after Peru. I went back and I finished my degree, graduated, and then decided to start a social enterprise based out of Toronto.
Okay. So back in Toronto, what was the experience, the difference in the experience of starting a social enterprise versus starting a for-profit business with your uncle?
Yeah, at the time, this is like 2006, 2007. At this point, the idea of funding and fundraising, finding investors or people willing to lend to a business, it was a business that didn't have profit as its primary motivator. was really difficult. That
Right.
social finance space was not
Sure.
ready for that. And so the
Yeah.
idea that we weren't just trying to make as much money as possible was really hard. And so I don't think that was received all that well.
What was the business? What was the social enterprise you were doing in Toronto at
Sure.
that time?
So, yeah, I took the experience that I had in Peru and saw that the work that volunteers were doing, there was mainly, kids. It was university students on break doing like voluntourism things, or families going out and doing good on community while on holiday. And we saw what they were doing and what they were learning. In addition to the impact, they were learning about communication, team building, leadership, problem solving, all the things that corporations pay a lot of money for in terms of like through an HR department. And so we developed corporate training and development company that instead of learning about leadership from a binder at a hotel conference center, we took you to Belize, Guatemala, Peru, and you got to do the volunteer work, have an impact on community. But then we would debrief at the end of the day to say, okay, so what did you learn about how you communicated either with each other or with the villagers? If you don't speak Quechua, how did you guys figure out what you're going to do, and how does that apply to the workplace?
And how long did that? How long were you able to sustain that company?
Only a couple of years. 2008 marked another crash in the market, sure. And it was the area was a place where companies told us that they didn't really need to innovate. They're like, we understand that taking our team to Muskoka or to Banff to learn this stuff maybe isn't the best way to do things, but right now we've got so many other problems that they weren't willing to take the chance. So we were able to keep it going for about 2 years, and then I started having to gig and put things together. And one of the things that I put together was a course on social entrepreneurship. And I was shopping it around. I sold it in one place in Toronto. And then I went back to where I did my undergrad. And I said, hey, are you interested? Can I run this program through your exec ed division? And I talked to the dean there. And he said, yeah, if you're interested in that, he's like, it costs $75, but you should apply to our PhD program. I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I'll pay $75. I'll apply to your PhD program. Meanwhile, I'll make 10 grand, 20 grand selling this course to you. In the end, right. I get into the PhD program. My startup runs out of funding, and I took it as a sign and ended up in academia. I did my PhD. I got to teach social entrepreneurship to young business students, to talk to them when they're 17 or 18 years old and put this idea in their head that they can do more. And I've been in higher education now ever since.
Sounds like he came out ahead. You got the 20 grand, 10 to 20 grand for your course, but he got a full tuition for a PhD.
Oh yeah. And an instructor for a bunch of courses, and yeah.
Right. Yeah. It was a good deal. So your involvement now, you give back a lot to the community on Vancouver Island through various groups. You're
sure.
Acting dean, School of Management at Royal Roads University. How do you feel that experience, being, you've transitioned to academia, but those experiences of, I'm not going to go so far as to say, let's say challenges in business. Yeah. How have they been able to complement, the environment that you're in now and being at the tables that you sit at?
So I mean, first and foremost, the focus is on the students. And so to be able to inspire them, to share those stories with them, um, I can have so much more of an impact. Me and my faculty, um, when we send people out into the world to do business. And so I think a lot of the ideals that developed over time, I try to bring into the type of business school that I want to create, that I am creating, that we're working on right now. And so to have some of these ideals front and center in what we're teaching the kind of next group of business owners and business creators and leaders. So that part's great. I think I also get to use my experience to help run the university, the school, So to think about the business school or the faculty of management or the university as a whole through that lens. A university is most definitely not a business, but we
Right.
can apply a lot of the learning we have to that context.
Totally makes sense. I'll tell you from my experience, having done the MBA at Royal Roads, where you and I first met, there's definitely a different sense of the context that is being or attempting to be put into things by the professors or faculty who have the direct experience versus those who have been in academia. And especially when you come from the business world to do an MBA, you could definitely get that sense.
So I'm not unique at Royal Roads in that sense. We've all done what we teach.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of why we hire the people that we do. We have some full-time academics, but to me, if you're going to teach in these programs, you need to have qualified. You need to have done what you're gonna talk about.
Yeah.
And so now we get to bring the theory and the application together.
Yeah, totally. Okay, one last question that I don't know if you can answer based on the myriad of stories we just heard. If you could choose the hardest day that you've had in business, what does that day look like?
I mean, there are some that are just exhausting because, it's just two people. You're on the go 18, 20 hours, and it is what it is. You're putting in the work. It's a hard day. I don't think I necessarily took some of the failures. We talked about the cotton candy one. That wasn't a hard day. That was a learning one for me, and that was okay.
Yeah.
Leaving was hard. Having to say this is it, stepping away, even when it's the right decision. Those were probably the toughest days. Now, whether that's because it was family or because, we think of our businesses or looking at things that we've created ourselves, things we've helped nurture and grow, and have to say it either didn't work out or it's not the right time. To have to say, so those are always the hardest days.
The fact that a lot of people stick with business, it's to continue to try and see something that you've been striving for the whole time, to achieve new heights or to achieve new goals, or and I can imagine that with that being part of your motivating factor to decide to step away, that means that you're not going to have a chance to continue to pursue that. And I can see that being super tough.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities that came and went, it's one thing. The opportunities that they're in the future,
right.
I don't think I'll ever lose that point of view, that perspective, that entrepreneurial mindset. That'll always be there. And the ideas are still coming, whether it's in the shower or on the drive to work or wherever it is. I still have those ideas, and you think, man, do I have time for a little side hustle and start something new? If I put a little
would
bit
you do
of money
it, Robert?
aside,
Would you start?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean,
yeah, okay.
I think I know a little bit more now than I did then. So I think a few more pieces need to be in place. Maybe I am where my uncle was, and so I don't think I'd be as cavalier or reckless as I would have been at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. If there's a good opportunity out there, yeah, I'll jump right back in.
Very cool. Well, Robert, as I said off the start of this, I was really looking forward to it. You didn't disappoint. Those are some amazing stories. I'm hoping that the three people that listen to this podcast got something out of it. I have no idea what to expect from this. So, but very generous with your time. I really, really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thanks, Trevor.